March 18, 1944, Stuttgart, Germany. The Daimler-Benz factory maintenance workshop stands silent at 4:30 in the morning. Otto Krebs kneels beside the final drive assembly of Panzer V Panther tank, serial number 2478, his fingers tracing the housing of the planetary gearing that transfers power from transmission to tracks. Above him, the tank's hull looms in the darkness. 50 tons of welded steel plate and machinery that will carry 5 men into battle against Soviet forces gathering 300 kilometers east of Warsaw. Otto has spent 43 years working with precision mechanisms, first as an apprentice clockmaker in his father's shop in Heidelberg, then as a master horologist maintaining church tower clocks throughout southern Germany, and for the last 18 months as a conscripted technical specialist in this factory where Germany builds its most advanced armored vehicles. His job is simple: inspect final drive assemblies before tanks leave the factory, verify gear tolerances, ensure proper lubrication, make certain that German engineering excellence translates to battlefield superiority. Tonight, Otto is doing something else entirely. He removes 4 precision shims from the planetary gear housing, thin steel washers, exactly 0.18 millimeters thick, that maintain critical spacing between gear faces. He replaces them with shims he machined himself, identical in appearance but 0.23 millimeters thick. The difference is 40 thousandths of a millimeter, invisible to casual inspection, meaningless during initial operation, catastrophic after approximately 80 to 90 kilometers of operation when cumulative gear stress causes the entire final drive assembly to seize. This is not Otto's first modification. Over the past 6 weeks, he has altered final drive assemblies on 37 Panther tanks destined for various Panzer divisions, fighting desperate defensive battles across the Eastern Front. The modifications are invisible, undetectable during factory acceptance testing, and absolutely devastating in combat conditions. A Panther tank with failed final drive becomes 45 tons of immobile steel, blocking roads, disrupting formations, forcing recovery operations that consume precious resources and time. Otto finishes the modification in 11 minutes. He reinstalls the inspection cover, torques the bolts to specification, marks the assembly with chalk to indicate completion of inspection. He moves to the next tank in the production line, Panther number 2479, and begins again. What makes Otto Krebs dangerous is not sabotage expertise or resistance training. He's never attended a clandestine meeting. He's never received instructions from Allied intelligence. He's simply a clockmaker who understands that precision mechanisms fail in predictable ways when tolerances are wrong, and he's applying that knowledge to destroy German armor from within. The factory security patrols never suspect him. The SS inspectors who monitor production never question his work. He's a 61-year-old technician who moves slowly, works carefully, and produces inspection reports that show perfect compliance with manufacturing standards. At 0500 hours, Otto completes his inspection shift. He files his paperwork with the night supervisor, washes grease from his hands, and walks through the factory gates into the pre-dawn darkness. Behind him, 40 Panther tanks sit ready for delivery. 16 of them carry Otto's modifications. In 3 days, they will be loaded onto rail cars. In 5 days, they will reach forward assembly areas in Poland. In 7 days, they will join Panzer Regiment 39 for a major counteroffensive against Soviet forces threatening the city of Lvov. In 8 days, during the critical opening hours of that offensive, 9 of those Panthers will suffer catastrophic final drive failures while advancing through muddy terrain under fire. They will block narrow roads. They will create traffic jams that expose following vehicles to Soviet anti-tank guns. They will force German commanders to divert recovery vehicles from other sectors. And they will fail at the precise moment when the German army can least afford equipment failures during a counterattack that represents Germany's last realistic chance to stabilize the Eastern Front before summer. Otto Krebs walks home through empty streets. He will sleep for 4 hours, eat breakfast with his wife, who knows nothing of his work, and return to the factory for the day shift, where he will inspect more tanks and make more modifications. He has no grand plan. He's simply doing what he can, using the only weapon available to him: knowledge of how precisely engineered systems fail when tolerances are wrong by fractions of a millimeter. Sometimes the most effective sabotage is invisible until the moment it matters most. Understanding Otto Krebs's technique requires understanding the Panther tank's final drive system, specifically the planetary gear assembly, that represents both the vehicle's greatest engineering achievement and its most critical vulnerability. The Panther, designated Panzerkampfwagen 5, entered service in 1943 as Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34. It featured sloped armor, a powerful 75mm gun, and excellent mobility. But it also featured a final drive system so complex and so precisely engineered that even minor deviations from specification caused catastrophic failures. The final drive assembly sits at each end of the Panther's hull, where the drive sprocket connects to the transmission. Inside the housing, a planetary gear system reduces the high-speed rotation from the transmission to the lower speed, higher torque rotation needed to move 50 tons of tank. The system uses a sun gear at the center, multiple planetary gears orbiting around it, and a ring gear on the outside. The entire assembly must maintain tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters. Too much clearance, and the gears hammer against each other, shedding metal fragments that contaminate the lubrication. Too little clearance, and the gears bind, generating friction and heat until the assembly seizes. German engineers specified exact shim thicknesses to maintain optimal gear spacing: 0.18 millimeters for the planetary gear carriers, creating clearance of 0.05 millimeters between gear faces. At this tolerance, the gears transfer power smoothly, the lubrication film remains intact, and the system functions reliably for thousands of kilometers. Otto's modification increases shim thickness to 0.23 millimeters, reducing gear clearance to 0.03 millimeters. During initial operation, during factory testing, during the first 50 kilometers of movement, this reduced clearance causes no obvious problems. The gears mesh, power transfers, the tank moves normally. But under combat conditions, under high load, during sustained operation through difficult terrain, the reduced clearance becomes critical. The gears heat up, metal expands, the microscopic clearance disappears, and the gears begin binding. Friction increases exponentially. Heat builds faster than the lubrication system can dissipate it. Eventually, usually after 80 to 100 kilometers of operation, the planetary gears seize completely. The final drive locks. The track stops moving. The tank becomes immobile. The beauty of Otto's sabotage is that it mimics known failure modes. Panther final drives were notoriously problematic throughout 1943 and early 1944. German engineers struggled with the design, constantly revising specifications, trying different materials, adjusting tolerances. Field commanders complained constantly about Panthers breaking down during operations. The problems were eventually traced to inadequate lubrication, insufficient cooling, and manufacturing quality control issues. When Otto's modified tanks fail in the field, German investigators attribute the failures to these known problems. They don't suspect sabotage because the failures look exactly like the mechanical problems that plagued Panthers for months. The shim thickness deviation is so small that even detailed inspection doesn't reveal it unless someone specifically measures every shim with precision instruments and compares measurements to factory specifications. Nobody does this. Field maintenance crews replace the entire final drive assembly, send the failed unit back to depot maintenance, and move on. Otto developed this technique through months of careful study. When he was first conscripted to factory work in October 1942, he spent weeks simply observing, learning how tanks were built, understanding the inspection procedures, identifying the critical components. His clockmaking background gave him insights that other workers lacked. He understood precision. He understood how microscopic variations in mechanical systems create cascading failures. He understood that the difference between reliable machinery and catastrophic breakdown is often measured in thousandths of a millimeter. His first sabotage attempt was clumsy. In January 1943, he deliberately damaged a gear tooth on a Panzer IV tank, filing it slightly to create a stress concentration point. The damage was discovered during final inspection. The gear was replaced. Otto was reprimanded for poor quality control but not suspected of sabotage. He learned from the mistake. Obvious damage attracts attention. Subtle modifications that mimic natural failures go unnoticed. By March 1943, he'd refined his approach. He began experimenting with shim thicknesses, making minute changes, documenting which modifications caused failures and which went unnoticed. He kept meticulous personal records, hidden in his workshop at home, noting serial numbers, modification types, and estimated time to failure. He treated sabotage like clockmaking, a precision craft requiring careful calculation and exact execution. The SS security apparatus never suspected him because he didn't fit the profile of a saboteur. He wasn't young and idealistic. He wasn't politically active. He'd never expressed anti-Nazi sentiments. He was simply an old man doing technical work, someone who'd been drafted into war production because Germany needed every available skilled worker. The Gestapo monitored younger workers, foreign laborers, known political dissidents. They didn't waste resources surveilling 61-year-old clockmakers with perfect work records. Otto's motivation wasn't political ideology. He wasn't a communist or a Democrat or a resistance fighter. He was a father whose son, Hans, had been killed at Stalingrad in February 1943. Hans Krebs, 24 years old, a Panzer crewman in the 16th Panzer Division, died when his tank was knocked out during the final desperate breakout attempts from the Stalingrad pocket. Otto received the notification in March. His son was dead. The tank that was supposed to protect him had failed. German engineering superiority, the thing Otto had believed in his entire life, hadn't saved Hans. Otto didn't rage or weep or join resistance networks. He simply decided that if German tanks had failed his son, he would make certain German tanks failed others. Not to help the Allies necessarily, not to advance some political cause, but simply because tanks that didn't work couldn't kill anyone. Every Panther he disabled was one less vehicle carrying 5 men into situations where they might die the way Hans died. He never discussed this with anyone. His wife, Greta, knew their son was dead. She didn't know Otto was sabotaging the weapons Germany needed to defend itself. She noticed he'd become quieter, more withdrawn, but attributed it to grief. She never suspected that her husband spent his nights machining modified shims in their basement workshop, creating the tools for systematic sabotage. By March 1944, Otto had modified components on 73 tanks. He kept precise records of serial numbers and modification dates. He listened to BBC radio broadcasts, illegal but widely practiced in Germany by people desperate for accurate war news. He tried to correlate reported German defeats with the deployment of tanks he'd sabotaged. It was impossible to verify, but occasionally he heard references to German armor failures during specific operations, and he wondered if his work had contributed. The modification he's making tonight to Panther 2, 4, 7, 8, and 15 other tanks is part of a specific plan. Otto has learned through factory gossip that this production batch is destined for Panzer Regiment 39, part of 1st Panzer Army, currently engaged in desperate fighting around Lvov in western Ukraine. He's also learned that Regiment 39 is being rebuilt for a major counteroffensive scheduled for late March. The regiment needs 40 Panthers to reach full strength. This production batch will provide exactly that number. Otto's plan is elegant. He's modifying 16 tanks, 40% of the batch. Not enough to be immediately obvious, enough to be catastrophic during sustained operations. The remaining 24 tanks will function normally, which will confuse German maintenance personnel when failures begin. They'll see some tanks operating perfectly, while others break down, suggesting manufacturing defects rather than systematic sabotage. He's also calibrated the modifications to fail at approximately 80 kilometers of operation. According to intelligence he's gleaned from factory planning documents carelessly discussed in the cafeteria, the counteroffensive will require Panthers to advance approximately 70 to 90 kilometers through difficult terrain to reach their objectives. Otto's modified tanks will begin failing precisely when they're furthest from repair facilities, deepest into enemy territory, most difficult to recover. At 05:45 hours, Otto arrives home. His apartment is small, 3 rooms in a building that survived Allied bombing raids by luck rather than design. Stuttgart has been hit repeatedly. The Daimler-Benz factory is a priority target. Allied bombers have tried destroying it 6 times. The factory survives because it's dispersed across multiple buildings, because German air defenses remain formidable, and because bombing accuracy isn't good enough to guarantee hits on specific structures. Otto removes his work clothes, washes thoroughly, and sits at the kitchen table. Greta has prepared ersatz coffee, grain-based substitute that tastes nothing like real coffee but provides warmth. She asks about his shift. He says it was routine, just inspections, nothing interesting. She mentions their daughter Elsa has written from Bavaria, where she's working in a textile factory. The letter is cheerful, carefully worded to pass censorship, revealing nothing of real conditions. They sit in silence for several minutes. Outside, the sky lightens toward dawn. In the distance, Otto hears air raid sirens. Not the urgent wail of incoming bombers, but the test signals run every morning at 6 o'clock, the sound used to terrify him. Now it's simply background noise, part of life in a city that's slowly being destroyed. Otto thinks about Panther 2, 4, 7, 8. In 3 days, it will leave the factory. In 5 days, it will be in Poland. In 8 days, if his calculations are correct, it will suffer catastrophic final drive failure during combat operations. 5 men crew a Panther tank, a commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. When the final drive fails, those 5 men will be stranded in a 45-ton steel box, probably under fire, forced to abandon the vehicle or wait for recovery under combat conditions. Some of them might die, others might survive. Otto doesn't know them. He'll never know what happens to them, but he thinks about Hans, 24 years old, dying in a burning tank at Stalingrad because German armor wasn't as invincible as the propaganda claimed. He finishes his coffee. Greta asks if he's feeling well. He looks tired, she says. He should rest more. Otto agrees. He's tired. He's been tired since February 1943 when the telegram arrived. But there's work to do, more tanks to inspect, more modifications to make, more small acts of resistance that probably don't matter in the grand scheme but are the only things he can control. At 07:30 hours, Otto returns to the factory for the day shift. The morning is cold and overcast. Workers stream through the gates. Thousands of men and women conscripted into war production, building the weapons that Germany needs to continue fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously. Most of them are exhausted, underfed, worn down by years of total war. Some are true believers, convinced Germany will still win, that miracle weapons will turn the tide. Others are simply surviving, doing what's necessary to avoid being sent to the Eastern Front or arrested by the Gestapo. Otto nods to the gate guards, shows his identification, and enters the factory floor. The assembly hall is massive, 300 meters long, filled with partially completed Panther tanks in various stages of production. Overhead cranes move hull sections. Welding torches spark. Machinery roars. The air smells of oil, metal, and ozone. He reports to his supervisor, Obermeister Helmut Roth, a party member and true believer who treats every production delay as sabotage and every quality issue as treason. Roth assigns Otto to inspect final drive assemblies on Panthers scheduled for completion this week. 12 tanks, 24 final drives, approximately 6 hours of work if everything goes smoothly. Otto collects his tools and begins. Each inspection follows the same procedure. Remove the inspection cover, check gear meshing, verify shim placement, measure lubrication levels, reinstall the cover, document completion. The procedure is standardized, specified in technical manuals, designed to catch manufacturing defects before tanks leave the factory. What the procedure doesn't catch is shims that are 0.05 millimeters thicker than specification, because the tolerance bands in the inspection manual allow for variation of plus or minus 0.1 millimeters. Otto's modifications fall within acceptable tolerance, according to the written specifications. They're only wrong if someone understands that the written tolerances are themselves inadequate for sustained combat operations. This is the genius of Otto's approach. He's not violating inspection procedures. He's exploiting the gap between factory specifications and combat requirements. German engineers wrote specifications for ideal conditions: clean environments, proper maintenance, controlled operations. Combat conditions are none of these things. Combat means mud, dust, extreme temperatures, sustained high-load operation, and delayed maintenance. Under combat conditions, the tolerance bands need to be tighter than factory specifications allow. Otto understands this because he spent 40 years maintaining precision mechanisms under varying conditions. He knows that specifications written for optimal environments fail under stress. By noon, Otto has completed 8 inspections. 6 are standard, unmodified assemblies that pass inspection normally. 2 receive his special attention. Panther 3009 and Panther 3012 both get modified shims installed during what appears to be routine inspection. The modifications take 11 minutes each, hidden within the normal 20-minute inspection cycle. Otto documents both tanks as passing inspection with no deficiencies noted. During lunch break, Otto sits alone in the cafeteria. Other workers gather in groups, discussing rumors about the war. Someone mentions that Soviet forces have reached the Romanian border. Someone else insists that new jet fighters will sweep Allied bombers from the skies. A younger worker, probably early 20s, argues that Germany should negotiate peace before the situation becomes hopeless. An older man, wearing a party pin, tells him to shut up or he'll report him to security for defeatism. Otto eats his bread and margarine ration, drinks ersatz, coffee, and listens without speaking. He's learned that silence is survival. Express opinions and you become memorable. Become memorable and someone eventually investigates your background, your activities, your loyalties. Better to be invisible, another old man doing technical work, too unremarkable to warrant attention. At 1300 hours, he returns to the factory floor. 4 more inspections remain. He completes 3 normally, 1 with modifications. By 15:30 hours, his shift ends. He's inspected 12 tanks today. 3 carry modifications that will cause them to fail after approximately 80 kilometers of operation. Combined with the 16 he modified during the night shift, today's production includes 19 sabotaged Panthers out of 52 total tanks scheduled for delivery this week. March 21st, 1944. Panzer Regiment 39 receives 40 new Panther tanks at their assembly area near Tarnopol, western Ukraine. The regiment has been fighting continuously since the Soviet winter offensive began in December. They've lost 32 Panthers to combat and mechanical failure over 3 months. The replacements are desperately needed. Hauptmann Victor Schneider, commander of 2nd Company, inspects his new tanks with satisfaction. They're factory fresh, properly painted in dark yellow camouflage, equipped with the latest modifications to address earlier reliability problems. The final drive issues that plagued Panthers during 1943 have supposedly been resolved. These tanks represent German engineering at its finest. Schneider's maintenance officer, Oberfeldwebel Karl Zimmermann, conducts acceptance inspections. He checks fuel levels, ammunition storage, radio functionality, and runs brief mobility tests. All 40 tanks pass inspection. Their engines run smoothly, transmissions shift properly, tracks move without binding. Zimmermann signs the acceptance documents. Regiment 39 now has 40 operational Panthers ready for combat. What Zimmermann doesn't know, what nobody in the regiment knows, is that 16 of their new tanks carry Otto Krebs's modifications. The shims are invisible. The tolerances appear correct. The tanks function normally during brief test operations. But inside those final drive assemblies, the clearances are wrong by 40,000ths of a millimeter, enough to create cascading failures under sustained combat operations. March 24, 1944. Panzer Regiment 39 receives orders for Operation Frederick, a counteroffensive designed to recapture the city of Kovel and stabilize the southern section of the Eastern Front. The operation requires 1st Panzer Army to advance 85 kilometers through muddy terrain, break through Soviet defensive positions, and capture key transportation hubs before Soviet reinforcements arrive. The offensive begins at 0400 hours. 40 Panthers from Regiment 39 advance in 2 columns, supported by infantry, artillery, and air cover. The terrain is challenging. Spring thaw has turned roads into mud. Cross-country movement is difficult. Tanks must maintain high engine power to avoid bogging down, putting maximum stress on transmissions and final drives. For the first 60 kilometers, the advance proceeds well. Soviet resistance is lighter than expected. The Panthers smash through defensive positions, their 75mm guns destroying T-34 tanks at long range. By evening, the regiment has advanced 70 kilometers, ahead of schedule. Schneider's 2nd Company has suffered no losses. His tanks are performing magnificently. At kilometer 73, Panther 2478, the first tank Otto, modified on March 18th, begins experiencing problems. The driver, Unteroffizier Franz Weber, notices increased resistance in the left track. He reports it to the tank commander, who orders him to continue. They're too close to the objective to stop for minor mechanical issues. At kilometer 79, the left final drive begins overheating. Weber smells burning lubrication oil, feels the steering become sluggish. He reports again. The commander, Lieutenant Dieter Braun, orders a brief halt. The crew dismounts to inspect. The left final drive housing is too hot to touch. Braun decides they'll continue with reduced speed, counting on the right track to compensate. At kilometer 84, during a tactical movement to outflank a Soviet anti-tank position, the left final drive seizes completely. The planetary gears lock solid. The left track stops moving. Panther 2478 slews violently, the right track pushing the hull in a circle. Weber fights the controls, trying to brake, but the momentum carries the tank into a muddy depression where it bogs down completely. Braun realizes immediately that they're immobile. The engine runs, but power doesn't transfer to the left track. The final drive has failed catastrophically. His tank, 45 tons of Germany's best armor, is now a stationary pillbox in the middle of a battlefield. He radios for recovery assistance and directs his crew to prepare for possible evacuation. Within the next 3 hours, 8 more Panthers suffer identical final drive failures. All of them fail at approximately 80 to 90 kilometers from the starting point. All of them seize suddenly during tactical movements under high load. The failures seem random. affecting tanks in different companies, but the pattern is unmistakable to regiment maintenance personnel. Oberfeldwebel Zimmermann, responding to the multiple failures, conducts field inspections. He finds seized planetary gears, overheated lubricant, and bearing damage consistent with insufficient clearance. He recognizes the symptoms because Panthers suffered similar problems throughout 1943. What confuses him is that these tanks are brand new, supposedly built to revised specifications that solved these issues. He reports to regiment headquarters that 9 Panthers are immobile due to final drive failures. Recovery will require heavy equipment and transport back to depot maintenance facilities. The repairs cannot be done in the field. The regiment has effectively lost 9 tanks, 23% of their operational strength, not to enemy action but to mechanical failure. Hauptmann Schneider is furious. He's lost 9 tanks without firing a shot. The offensive has stalled because roads are blocked by immobile Panthers. Recovery operations are consuming resources needed for combat operations. Soviet forces are using the delay to reinforce their positions. What should have been a breakthrough operation is becoming a grinding attritional battle. By March 26th, Regiment 39 has recovered 8 of the 9 failed Panthers and transported them to depot maintenance. The 9th tank, Panther 2478, is destroyed by Soviet artillery while waiting for recovery. Lieutenant Braun and his crew escape before the ammunition explodes. Depot maintenance personnel begin disassembling the failed final drives. What they find confirms field diagnoses. The planetary gears seized due to insufficient clearance. Metal fragments contaminated the lubricant. Bearings overheated and welded themselves to their races. The assemblies are completely destroyed, requiring replacement rather than repair. What maintenance personnel don't find is evidence of sabotage. The shim thicknesses are measured as part of the failure analysis, but the measurements show values within the acceptable tolerance range specified in technical manuals. Nobody thinks to question whether the tolerance range itself is adequate. The failures are attributed to manufacturing quality control problems, inadequate lubrication, or simply bad luck. A report is filed with Daimler-Benz Factory Quality Control. The factory investigates, reviews production records, and finds that all tanks were inspected according to procedures. Inspector Otto Krebs signed off on 3 of the failed tanks. His inspection records show proper procedures followed, measurements within tolerances, no deficiencies noted. There's no reason to suspect his work specifically. The investigation concludes that the failures resulted from cumulative manufacturing defects, possibly related to material quality issues or inadequate factory testing protocols. Recommendations include enhanced quality control and more rigorous acceptance testing. Nobody suspects systematic sabotage because the pattern doesn't match known sabotage signatures. What the investigation misses is that 6 more Panthers from the same production batch will fail over the next 10 days as Regiment 39 continues operations. By April 5, 1944, Regiment 39 has suffered 16 final drive failures among the 40 Panthers received in late March. That's a 40% failure rate, catastrophically high by any standard. The regiment's combat effectiveness is crippled. They cannot conduct sustained mobile operations because commanders don't trust the tanks to function. Panthers are held in reserve, used as defensive strong points rather than offensive weapons. The regiment that was supposed to spearhead the counteroffensive becomes a static defense formation, their expensive armor wasted because the vehicles cannot be counted on to move reliably. Operation Frederick fails to achieve its objectives. First Panzer Army advances 80 kilometers, but cannot break through Soviet defensive lines. The offensive stalls, transitions to defense, and eventually becomes a fighting withdrawal as Soviet forces mount their own counteroffensive in April. The failure of Regiment 39 to maintain operational tempo contributes significantly to the overall operations failure. Strategic analysts after the war will attribute Operation Frederick's failure to multiple factors, including Soviet defensive strength, German logistics problems, air superiority issues, and inadequate armor reserves. They'll never know that a significant factor was a 61-year-old clockmaker in Stuttgart who understood that precision mechanisms fail predictably when tolerances are wrong by fractions of millimeters. April 10, 1944. Otto Krebs continues his work at the Daimler-Benz factory. He's heard rumors through factory gossip that a recent production batch suffered unusual reliability problems in the field. He doesn't know specifics. He doesn't know that 16 of his modified tanks failed exactly as he calculated. But he continues his work methodically, modifying shims, making minute changes to gear clearances, creating invisible defects that will manifest as catastrophic failures under combat conditions. The SS security apparatus remains unaware. Otto's techniques are too subtle, his modifications too carefully calibrated to mimic natural failure modes. He's simply an old man doing quality control inspections, unremarkable, unmemorable, invisible within the vast machinery of German war production. By April 1944, Otto has modified components on 143 tanks. Not all modifications result in failures. Some tanks never see combat. Others operate under conditions where the reduced clearances don't cause immediate problems, but enough fail, at critical moments during critical operations, to have measurable strategic impact. German armor reliability problems are well documented throughout 1944. Panthers, Tigers, and other advanced designs suffered mechanical breakdowns at rates that horrified field commanders. Historians have attributed these problems to over-engineering, inadequate testing, manufacturing shortcuts under pressure, and maintenance challenges. All these factors were real, but hidden within the statistics were deliberate acts of sabotage by people like Otto Krebs, people who understood machinery well enough to break it invisibly. Otto never seeks recognition. He never contacts Allied intelligence or joins resistance networks. He simply continues his quiet war against the machines that killed his son. Each modified tank is a small act of revenge, a tiny contribution to Germany's defeat, a way for a grieving father to feel that he's doing something meaningful. The war will continue for another year. Otto will continue his sabotage throughout that year. He'll modify final drives on Panthers, Tigers, and other armor until the factory is finally destroyed by Allied bombing in February 1945. He'll survive the war, return to clockmaking in the ruins of Stuttgart, and never speak of what he did. In 1947, a Soviet intelligence report analyzing German armor losses will note unusual concentration of mechanical failures among specific Panther production batches from late 1943 and early 1944. The report will speculate about possible sabotage but conclude that evidence is insufficient to confirm systematic efforts. The report will be classified, filed, and forgotten. Otto Krebs will die in 1962 at age 79, taking his secrets with him. His daughter Elsa will find his hidden notebooks while clearing his workshop after his death. The notebooks contain serial numbers, dates, modification details, and calculations. She won't understand their significance. She'll burn them, thinking they're just technical notes from her father's factory work. The true extent of Otto's impact will never be known. How many tanks failed because of his modifications? How many operations were disrupted? How many German soldiers survived because their tanks broke down before reaching combat? How many Allied soldiers survived because German armor wasn't where it was supposed to be, when it was supposed to be there? The answers are unknowable, lost in the chaos and complexity of total war. What can be said with certainty is that sometimes the most devastating weapons aren't guns or bombs or grand strategic plans. Sometimes they're precision knowledge applied with patience by someone who understands that complex systems fail predictably when tolerances are wrong by unmeasurable amounts. An old man with calipers and shims, working in darkness, making minute changes that cascade into strategic consequences. A clockmaker who understood that time, mechanical precision, and carefully calculated sabotage could stop panzers more effectively than any weapon the Allies possessed. In the end, Otto Krebs was simply a father who refused to accept that his son's death was meaningless. He couldn't bring Hans back. He couldn't change the war's outcome alone. But he could make certain that some German tanks never reached the battlefield, that some crews never faced the terror Hans experienced, that in some small way his knowledge and skill mattered. The modified shims were his memorial to a son killed at Stalingrad, tiny pieces of steel that represented love, loss, and the quiet determination of one man who refused to build weapons without fighting back in the only way available to him.